Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I will be doing a ranking of all the seasons of Survivor South Africa up to this point, which is right before the start of Season 7, Island of Secrets. And I feel like Survivor South Africa is a pretty good series, with most of the seasons being relatively strong compared to many of the other seasons that came out around it, especially in comparison to many other international seasons. Now this video will include spoilers for all of these seasons, so don't watch it if you don't want to get spoiled. So that out of the way, let's just get started. So as implied earlier, there are 6 seasons of Survivor South Africa, so we'll start off with number 6. So, the worst season of Survivor South Africa to me is Survivor South Africa Malaysia, also known as Season 2. Now, even though this is my least favorite season, I don't necessarily dislike this season. It's just so meh. A big portion of that comes from the cast, which I think is pretty lackluster, especially compared to other South African seasons, where in this cast, half the cast is pretty dull, pretty forgettable, and then the other half, while they are characters, they come off as very unlikable. And there's characters like Hein, Dyke, and Angie, who are big characters on the show, but aren't people that you necessarily root for. There's a lot of drama in the first half of the season, but a lot of it comes off as pretty mean-spirited. And that, mixed in with the game being pretty tame for most of the time, it makes this kind of a slower season. So from a gameplay perspective, the game plays out just like many other early Survivor seasons, where most of the pre-merge is dictated by who doesn't fit in or who's physically weak. And then by the merge, they stick by tribal lines, and there's a tiebreaker challenge that dictates pretty much the rest of the game. There is a flip at the final 5 that happens, but that was more so due to personal reasons than gameplay reasons. Few people on this season knew what they were actually doing strategically. The 2 most strategic people of the season were probably Rajesh, who was an early boot, who seemed to know what to do strategically. It's just he was so bad socially that he couldn't make up for it. And then we got Grant, who did dominate the game strategically, but ended up losing at the very end. And speaking of the end, I don't like how the end game plays out. These first 2 seasons of Survivor South Africa play out in a similar way, where at the final 4, there is an endurance challenge, where the first person eliminated from that endurance challenge is eliminated from the game. And it sucks that this happened to Manla, who is probably one of the more likable people of the season, and he had just come off of making a pretty big move at the final 5. And he more than likely wins the game if he gets to the end, so I think he really gets screwed over here. At least here, 3rd place is still determined by a vote. The winner of this challenge does get immunity and votes out a person in 3rd place, unlike another season that we'll talk about. I also feel like the outcome of the final vote was also pretty disappointing here, where with Lorette and Grant being the final 2, I felt like Lorette played a pretty emotional game most of the time and made a lot of social mistakes, but she ends up beating Grant, this person who dominated the game, pretty much because she needed the money more. Overall, this is a pretty forgettable season, but it is rarely actively bad. It's just so average throughout, and that's why it's my least favorite Survivor South Africa season. And now we move on to number 5, which for me is Survivor South Africa Panama, also known as Season 1, which is a season I do enjoy and is probably my favorite international season up to that point. I mean, after like the UK seasons and Australia Survivor 2002, this season's leap and bounds better than those seasons, and it's still slightly better than something like Australian Celebrity Survivor, though the 2 seasons do play out relatively similarly. Unlike Season 2, I feel like the cast here is pretty strong. There are a couple forgettable early boots, but overall I think there's some really great characters that go out early like Sam and Numisa. And then by the final 8, I feel like everyone remaining in the game has all gotten their time to shine, whether it be strategically or character-wise. This season includes one of my favorite older international characters in Nico, who's a complete lunatic. And what's so great about him is that he's voted out at the 3rd Tribal Council, but because someone quits, he's not actually voted out of the game. He stays in the game but has an automatic vote against him at the next tribal. And this leads to a lot of drama, and I thought he was a lot of fun on the show. But even without him, I think there's some other great characters that make... There are other characters like Imzi and Zane who had really fun character moments as well. From a gameplay perspective, I feel like almost everyone here was playing the game and really wanted to win. Now, did they make the most strategic moves all the time? Not necessarily. But unlike some other international seasons, everyone here was trying to win the game. Well, except for one person, I should say. Ironically, that's the person who ends up winning the game in Vanessa, where she was willing to give up her game for MZ, but wasn't really given the opportunity. The pre-merge of this season is pretty solid, where every vote has some sort of intrigue. There are a lot of twists involved here, but I feel like they were integrated pretty well in this season. The post-merge, though, is pretty slow. It is a pagonging, and what sucks even more is that they had Dead Man's Island, which essentially is a post-merge extinction island that had 2 people return at the final 3, which leads to an insane final 5 vote where Gareth, this dominant player of the season, ends up going out, which sucks for him because, again, he was in the winning position at that point, being in the final 3 with 2 people who were never taking each other, and with him being super physically capable as well, but he really gets screwed by MZ and Vanessa returning to the game. And that vote is really insane. I think it's one of the best votes in early International Survivor history, where Jacinda, Gareth, and Zayn were the final 3, MZ and Vanessa came back, MZ wins immunity. So you would think that means, okay, Vanessa is going home. But they put in the work. They put in work to get Zayn to flip on Jacinda, as Zayn and Jacinda never got along throughout the entire season. While Zayn did get along with MZ and Vanessa throughout the season, but he stuck to tribal lines. But here, they finally convinced him to flip, so he was going to vote out Jacinda. So Zayn goes to Gareth, his final 2 alliance, and tells him, hey, I'm voting out Jacinda, and Gareth is okay with it. And that's probably the fatal flaw that Gareth has here, is that he knows about the Jacinda plan, but doesn't decide to tell Jacinda, who he also had a final 2 with. Instead, he decides that I'm going to throw my vote away to Zayn, so that he doesn't piss off Jacinda at the end. But this is where MZ and Vanessa do make a great move. Again, while I do think them being voted out and coming back into the game invalidates their games entirely, I do think this is a fantastic move, where they do go to Jacinda then, and then tell her about the plan, and convince her to flip against Gareth, who again, she had a final 2 with. And they end up voting out Gareth in a 3-1 vote, which is a really fun vote and a great vote if it happened naturally, but the fact that a twist had to happen to make this happen, also the fact that Gareth just completely gets screwed over, really sours my opinion on this season. And from that point on, just like in Malaysia, the final 4 is determined by a challenge. And unlike Malaysia, the final 3 is also determined by a challenge. Where Zayn and MZ, as I said, probably 2 of the better characters of the season, go out back to back after losing their respective challenges. And Vanessa, who probably is the most boring person left in the game from the merge on, ends up winning immunity here and ends up winning in a jury vote 3-2, where she gets the votes of her 2 former tribe members plus Zayn. As I said, Zayn didn't like Jacinda and she was at the end with Jacinda. So overall, despite its pretty terrible production value, this is a pretty fun season with a really fun cast, but it does have a very disappointing ending and is plagued by endgame twists, so that's why it places at number 5 for me. So now we're moving on to number 4, which I gotta say, these next 3 spots were all really, really close. I think these are really interchangeable. They're all good seasons, and they're all around the same sort of level. So it was pretty difficult to pick which one goes above each. But I think I've decided that number 4 here is Survivor South Africa, Santa Carolina, also known as Season 3, which I do think, as I said, is a really fun season, but there are some blatant flaws throughout. So from a cast perspective, I feel like this cast is pretty mixed. This is a celebrity season, so there are some really good personalities throughout this season, some good characters like Ashley, Sade, Kaz, and Oker, but you also have a lot of the pre-mergers who just didn't seem to care. And most of them were pretty boring. Though you do have certain characters like Darren and Craig who are standouts there. And within the first 2 episodes, you have 2 people quit the game. You literally have someone quit at the very beginning because they missed their daughter. And then in episode 2, we have Jub, who quits the game because he has an infection on his penis. And he's really scared that his penis is gonna fall off. So he ends up quitting the game. It's a really fun scene on the show. Again, it's a ridiculous scene, but it's probably one of the funniest scenes on the season. Now, from a gameplay perspective, the game starts off pretty standardly. Both tribes get their majority alliances, and they pick off people who aren't in the majority. Again, usually social outliers or people who are weak. I also feel like the beginning of this game was really harped by a lot of really random twists that were there for really no reason. They didn't really seem to have any impact on anything. But that's all the negatives out of the way. Again, the biggest negatives for me, as I said, are like half the cast and then a weak pre-merge, but the post-merge is fantastic. The entire post-merge is insane, and a lot of that has to do with Ashley, and Isaac. So let's just play out the entire post-merge here. So coming into the merge, there's the red tribe and blue tribe. I'm not going to bother even saying their names, but they're equal in numbers, 5-5. So the first vote ends up being a tiebreaker. Hannah goes home in a tiebreaker challenge, where again, here in this season, tiebreaker is still previous votes. There are no rocks or anything. It's still previous votes, which also plays a major impact here. So Hannah goes home, so the red tribe loses a member, blue tribe goes into the lead. But then the next tribe, which obviously should be a 5-4 vote, Isaac from the blue tribe decides, you know what, I'm going to throw away my vote for some reason. And it becomes a 4-4-1 vote, and guess what, we go to a tiebreaker at final 9, where Lo goes home from the blue tribe because of the votes that the red tribe gave him at the previous tribal council. Then at the next vote, at the final 8, Isaac decides to flip back, causing another tie. This time Okert from the red tribe goes home because of the votes the blue tribe gave him the previous tribal council. And at the final 7 here is where Ashley really comes to life. She built an alliance with Gigi and Sade, the 2 remaining females in the game, and both of them being original red tribe members while she was an original blue tribe member. Through this, and also her relationships with people like Kaz and Isaac and Proverb, she's able to manipulate this final 7 vote to become a 3-2-1-1 vote to spread the votes around just in case of a tie in the future, but still getting rid of the only person she doesn't have an alliance with in Gis, or Geis? I forgot how you pronounce his name. And all this comes to fruition at the final 6, where at the final 6 here, she decides that Isaac needs to go, but she doesn't want to be the one that's directly doing this, so she's able to get the 2 women that she pulled over to her side vote for Isaac, while her tribe splits the votes, causing it to be a 2-2 tie between Gigi, Sade, and Isaac, where Gigi and Sade both had 0 votes, while Isaac had 1 vote coming from the previous tribal council, which Ashley manipulated. And then we get to the final 5, where she makes a massive move here and flipping against her final 2 alliance from the very beginning in Kaz. And then at the final 4 vote, she's able to convince Gigi to flip against Sade, vote Sade out, and Ashley wins final immunity to decide the very end of the game. All this while winning 5 straight immunities at the very end of the game, and also finding an idol that she never had to play. But sadly, she makes the wrong choice at the final 3 that causes her to lose the game in a 6-3 vote. This is a really fun post-merge. And it's so much fun just watching Ashley play the game, because I think she is probably one of the best players to ever play Survivor internationally. Her run is so fun to watch, but as I said, she loses to Gigi, who played a very Natalie White-esque game. But this is still a fun season, despite its slow pre-merge and mixed casts. Though, I do feel like it is more inconsistent than the next season that we'll talk about, which is why I placed this right here. And now we move on to number 3, which again was pretty close between these next 2 spots. But I do think, to me, number 3 is Survivor South Africa, Maldives, also known as Season 4, which I think is probably one of the most consistent seasons of Survivor South Africa. From a casting perspective, this season was a celebrities versus normal people cast, and I think because of that, it has a slightly better cast than the previous season. I think most of the normal people were pretty good casting choices, with people like Allison, Tejan, and Harry being some really fun characters, and then we got some good celebrity casting choices as well, with Heike, Bonnie, and Roxy being great characters as well. But I do think there are a couple duds, with most of them being the celebrities. From a gameplay perspective, this was a really fun season as well, with the first vote of this season being pretty insane, where Lucanio, this guy, this massive James Clement sort of guy, being taken out in a 3-2 vote right away. And then from that point on, pretty much until he's out at the final 7, Tejan is such a major factor on this season, pretty much being a center point of all the drama and gameplay on his tribe, and also of the early merge. A lot of this has to do with his ridiculous gameplay style, where he decides to flip back and forth between the celebrities and the normal people, causing a pretty big rivalry between him and Heike, as he blindsides Heike over and over again. The game stays consistently interesting throughout, with almost every vote being some sort of flip or blindside. And then we get to the final 6, which was really interesting to watch, despite it being a near advantage get-in style vote, where through the use of an idol, the immunity necklace, and the white cowrie, a 3-person alliance in Heike, Let's Go, and Bonnie, who are part of a 3-3 vote there, were all immune, while the other 3 got easily picked off afterwards, and really had no shot to really defend against this. And speaking of that, this season really has an abundance of twists with the black cowrie, the white cowrie, all these other things, but I feel like they play out pretty good here. But really at this point, that's pretty much every Survivor South Africa season. And I think a great capper to the season is watching Let's Go make such a massive mistake at the final 3 by taking Heike to the end over Bonnie, making her lose in an 8-3 vote, which is such a dumb move because Heike was so blatantly loved by the jury. Overall, this is a consistently good season throughout, with some really fun characters and gameplay. Despite some similar problems to Santa Carolina, I do feel like this season improves upon it in almost every single way. Though I do think Santa Carolina does hit higher highs in this season, I feel like it also hits lower lows. So because of that, Maldives places at number 3 for me. And now for my number 2 season of Survivor South Africa of all time, which is Survivor South Africa Champions, also known as Season 5, which, to be honest, I don't know if it should be this high. The thing is that when I first watched this season, I really loved it. At the time that I watched it, it was one of my favorite international seasons. However, since then, I have rewatched the season, and my opinion of it did go down a bit. But the thing is, I had such a raw enjoyment of this season the first time watching it, that's kind of hard for me to place it any lower. Though if you do analyze the season, I feel like this season has a lot more faults than Santa Carolina and Maldives, but it also has some higher highs than those seasons. So because of that, it became very tricky for me, but considering the fact that on my first watch, I did enjoy this season more than those other 2, I am putting it here at number 2. So let's talk about the problems. The big blatant problems for me is 1, this is an 18 episode season with hour-long episodes, with certain episodes that really drag out, and there are 2 non-elimination episodes with the premiere and the merge episode, with the merge episode really dragging on because I feel like at that point the vote was pretty predictable. Secondly, and most importantly really, is the Champions twist, which is 2 sports players were captaining these 2 tribes not as players but solely as captains. They participated in challenges, they did not vote until Final Tribal. However, they did live with them for the first half of the game. They weren't at the camps post-merge, but they did participate in a challenge where the winner of that challenge got to nullify 1 vote at Tribal Council. And these 2 champions here, which are Cornet and Mark, they really hog up the screen time and really make the season more focused on challenges than it really needed to be. And because of them having such a massive presence in the pre-merge, Cornet ends up having the most confessionals of the season, despite barely being in the post-merge. But now moving on to the more positive things. First up, the cast. I think the cast here is fantastic. There are a lot of super fans in this cast. There's people like Sivu, Shane, and Marion who talk about things that happen in US Survivor on this show. And then there's many other people who aren't necessarily massive fans, but do still play really hard like Graham and Xavion. Overall though, there are still some pretty forgettable people in the pre-merge here. But the season also has some of the best characters in international Survivor history, with the people that I mentioned before, plus people like Boulay, David, Solly, Steven, Sonette, and Shona, who each had really fun character moments throughout as well. The season starts off with a bang with Xavion creating an alliance at the beginning of the game that seemed to have the numbers, but then Graham decides to build his own counter-alliance and blindsides Ashley, who is Xavion's close alliance member. And through that, also blindsiding Cornet, who is their tribe captain. A few votes later, we have another really fun vote where David and Shona find the idol together. But Shona tries to steal the idol for herself, so David decides to blow up Shona's game, forcing her to give the idol to Cornet, and she gets voted out later that night. And mind you, something about this season is that there are no idol rules. You can steal idols, which I don't particularly like. I think that's a massive downside to the season, though there are some really great moments that come from this. I just feel like it leaves a kind of an icky feeling about it, though. And then after the swap, Cornet's tribe decides to hand off their idol over to the other tribe to save Gina. However, the other tribe's able to trick Gina to get her away from her bag, allowing Shane to steal her idol from her bag and vote out Gina later that night. And mind you, Shane has already stolen an idol earlier in the season. Sivu was the one that originally found the idol for that tribe earlier in the season. However, he had no way to transport the idol out of there without being seen. So that leads to Shane seeing that Sivu found the idol and deciding, you know what, let's go take it. So he ends up taking the idol despite it already being found by Sivu. But then we move on to the merge, where we do get a really weird vote split at the merge there, where it could have easily went really wrong, where Shane successfully plays the idol on himself, leading to a 3-3 to 1-0 vote, where Graham, who had been dominating the game up until that point, could have potentially went home there due to Althoff, his closest ally, deciding to throw away his vote. But luckily, Graham does get saved on the revote. Now, Graham really dominates this season from this point on, where he orchestrates the Solly blindside the very next vote by getting Shane, who was his biggest threat in the game. He's able to get Shane onto his side, only to blindside Shane at the final 7, where Shane had 2 idols in his possession. Mind you, Shane did leave one at camp inside his shoe, which led to Sivu finding the idol that Shane left behind and successfully playing it at the final 5, which does lead to Graham losing control at that vote, but I feel like that's something that shouldn't have happened to begin with. If this was US Survivor, that idol would be null and void. But Graham is still able to survive the final 4 vote, which is also a fun time where Boulay, who was Sivu's closest ally, flips on him, only for Graham to flip on David, who was his closest ally at the time, leading to a fire-making challenge between Sivu and David, where Sivu comes out on top. Mind you, this is a big strategic mistake from Graham, as he would have easily won against David, but him against Sivu was definitely a tougher competition. And this leads to a really fun final tribal council, where Graham and Sivu really duke it out for the same type of votes, where Graham comes out on top in a 5-3-2 vote. Overall, this is one of my favorite international seasons, though it does have a lot of flaws. It has some really great gameplay and a really fun endgame that makes me place it here at number 2. And now we're moving on to the number 1 season of Survivor South Africa, which should be pretty obvious at this point, and it's probably the season that most people have watched. But here we go. Number 1 season of Survivor South Africa is Survivor South Africa Philippines, also known as Season 6, which is the most recent season. Now, this was the 2018 reboot of Survivor South Africa with a completely different production crew, which led to it being run very similarly to the modern US seasons, with similar twists like extra votes and jury removals. It was a really fun season. To be honest, after some thought, this might be my favorite season of International Survivor in general. The cast here is incredible, with some all-time great characters in Tom, Jean, Werner, PK, Tony, Palessa, Shawnee, Tevin, Martinez, Ace. I mean, there's so many great characters here. And most of them are completely ridiculous. Like, you would think that some of this stuff would be scripted at how dumb and ridiculous it is, but they're just really fun character moments throughout the entire season. I mean, where else can you get a fight as funny as, like, the Tom and PK fight, or moments like Werner eating his idol clue? And this ridiculousness spreads to the gameplay, where right at the beginning we have a 5-4 vote, where Sheamus goes out, after some really ridiculous maneuvering back and forth, and then right after that we go to Rocks. We go to Rocks on the second vote of the season. Like, it's such a ridiculous thing, but to be honest, the season does slow down, I feel like, after that, for the rest of pre-merge. There are a couple other highs, like the Marushka vote, and then the Tevin blindside is a big blindside in the season. But the thing is that even though the gameplay slows down, the character moments don't. The season stays consistently good throughout, and we get another really fun vote at the final 9, where through 3 idol plays, we get a 1-1 to 0-0 vote, with PK and Werner nullifying most of the votes there. And in the next episode, we have Palessa, who was the big fan favorite of the season at that point, who was an underdog and also had an idol in her pocket, getting blindsided, despite her knowing that she was probably one of the 2 options to go home. At the final 5, we have Werner pulling out a Natalie Anderson-like move where he places idol on Jean to eliminate one of his former close allies in Katinka, which is such a great move despite him going out in the very next vote. But speaking of Werner, Werner played one of the most dominant games in the history of International Survivor, and he would have easily been one of my top winners if he had pulled it out. But obviously that wasn't the case. And then this season ends with Tom winning the game, which is so mind-blowing considering Tom is essentially, people have compared him to Homer Simpson. I feel like that's a very apt comparison. And I think outside of people like probably Tony Velachos and Sandra Diaz-Twine, I feel like he might be the best character to also be a winner. Overall, this is a fantastic season with a perfect mix of character moments and gameplay. So despite it having a few slower rounds, the character moments really keep the season strong throughout, and makes this my favorite season of Survivor South Africa, and probably my favorite season of International Survivor in general. There we go, that is my entire ranking of the Survivor South Africa seasons. Obviously Season 7 is right around the corner at the time of recording, and we'll probably be doing a review of that when it's finished, and we'll see where it ranks on this list afterwards. Survivor South Africa in general is a pretty strong international series, and if you pay attention to this list, pretty much every season gets better than the previous one. This was pretty much in chronological order outside of seasons 1 and 2. And to be honest, I think the main factor of seasons 1 and 2 was the casting. But I feel like Survivor South Africa, after every single season, they improve upon what they did previously. So I am really excited for season 7 to see how that one goes. But yeah, there we go. That is it for this video. Those are my rankings of the Survivor South Africa seasons. Thank you for watching.